Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Barry Lydon, Vice President of Patient Engagement at Edwards Lifesciences. I want to welcome all of you to the Patient Engagement Open Forum, From Vision to Reality, Patient Engagement in the Medtech Sector. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I realize that typically these events start out with a period of everybody figuring out how to log on, but we're hoping that everybody has figured that out. Because we've got a lot to do this morning or afternoon or evening, whatever time zone you're in. Again, I'm Barry Lydon, Vice President of Patient Engagement at Edwards Lifesciences. And Edwards is a medical device company based in Southern California, where I am this morning. So those of you who are joining me on the West Coast, good morning. I've been involved in patient engagement for the past 5 years at Edwards. And I'm in this room and a part of this program here today because Edwards is really focused on trying to help patients out. And we realize that we can't do this alone. It takes a community. We all have to do this together with patients, with patient communities, patient support services, and with other industry colleagues. And so I'm really excited about today's session, really looking forward to trying to really dig into what is it that we can do in the medtech sector to ensure that patients are really involved in what we do. So if you could turn to the next slide, please. So for those of you who are new to this, the Patient Engagement Open Forum virtual session here is a series of virtual events, all designed to try to get the patient perspective, really into what it is that we do in healthcare. And what we're going to do here today, I kind of think of what we're doing here is almost like a quasi-public hearing in a way, but also a workshop. It's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit and to then get involved and really ask questions, make suggestions, and help us all learn and co-create the future of patient engagement. So if you can go to the next slide. We're going to ask a few things of you in order for this to be really helpful to you, for you to get the most out of it. Be present and be engaged. I know this is hard. We've all been struggling through this Zoom stuff during this pandemic. It's been challenging, and I know the tendency to want to multitask. There's a new email that just came in. It's hard, but I would really suggest that if you want to get something out of this time, really be focused on what it is that we're doing. I don't think we are going to be able to hear you anyway, but all microphones should be muted, particularly for my fellow panelists here, until you're at the point of your presentation or you want to weigh in with comments. We really want to make sure that you are involved. So listen carefully, come up with questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. There is a Q&A function in the, I'll go over the technology in a second. This session will be recorded, so that way others who might not be able to make it today can also learn. And some of the workshop aspect of this will actually extend beyond the time we have here today. We're going to keep this process open for a little while so people can continue to collaborate beyond the extent of today's meeting. If you can turn to the next slide, please. So on the technology here, some of you may be familiar with Zoom by now, but if you're not, there's a couple of things here, a couple of features here that I think are pretty cool. One is if you have a question for the panelist or for anybody on the, for us, the panelists here, use the Q&A function. That's a place for us to queue up questions and try to answer them. And there's a really neat feature that I've just discovered. I didn't realize that you can actually upvote. So if you see a question that you like, click on it, you can give it a little vote, and that gives us an idea. That way we don't have the same question being asked several times. We can see how many people are really interested in this. The chat section is also for you to comment or to post links or share information. Again, all this is going to be recorded. So if you have resources that you would like to throw into the mix here, please use the chat session as a way to do that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm really excited about today's session. I think we're really privileged to have an amazing panel of speakers, and I'm going to turn to each of them to introduce themselves a little bit and share a little bit about what their hope is today. So Virginie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Virginie Delage. I work for Medtronic in Western Europe, and I'm responsible for the patient engagement activities within our cardiac rhythm management and cardiac diagnostic services division. I'm very happy to be able to participate to this discussion, and I'm actually very excited for the great discussion we will have on how we can advance patient engagement in MedTech together.
Great, thanks, Virginie. Paola.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Paola Kruger. I'm a patient expert. I'm a UPATI fellow, which means I did the UPATI patient expert course several years ago. Since then, I've been working as a patient expert, focusing mainly on the inclusion of patients in the area of medicines, but lately also medical devices. I think my objective for today is to learn from all the other stakeholders. I think it's a great opportunity also for us to learn what also the other viewpoints are. And I also hope to inspire other patients to get involved in MD development.
Great, thanks. And we'll learn a little more about what UPATI is for those of you who are not as familiar with UPATI. And Michelle, Dr. Tarver.
Good day, good evening. I'm Michelle Tarver. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and Technology Innovation at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Our office is really charged with leading the way in terms of patient science and engagement, as well as ensuring that underrepresented populations' voices are included in the conversation with respect to regulated medical devices. I hope for today that we inspire people to be bold and really think of true strategies to engage patients in their medical product development, as well as inspire patients to pick up the charge and help. So I'm looking forward to today's dialogue. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michelle. All right, next slide. We are looking forward to a great session. As you can see, the panelists are representing the medical device sector, regulators, and also patient organizations. We're going to have some time for Q&A following 3 presentations, 10 minutes each. We encourage all of you to participate in this, and I'm going to try to keep us all on track. Next slide. We're going to be using a technology called GroupMap, and you will get a link in the chat later to help you with that. And we'll explain it a little bit more as we get into it, particularly the I for instructions part, which I'll explain a little bit later. But you will need to use your computer. We really recommend that you do that not on an iPhone or a tablet. And ideally, if you have 2 screens, that'd be great. But if you don't, just be able to switch back and forth between screens. You're going to keep Zoom open, but you're going to then use GroupMap to participate. Next slide. So we're going to start out with GroupMap with a quick couple of questions here. And so we're going to go ahead and share the link in the comments, I think. Is that right? Is it in there? Yes, it is. There we go. Okay, there you've got the link in the comments from Daniela. Thank you, Daniela. If you can click on that link, please, and fill in your email address just so you can log in, and then answer that quick poll here. And the first question is, we really want to know who's here with us today. So get to know your audience, right? So let's figure this out. And after you click on your vote, you will then be taken to a results panel. I think you should be able to see it, and I think we're also going to share it on the screen here. All right. Do we want to close it out? We still have a lot of folks involved here, so can you, Daniela, switch to the next page on GroupMap? Do you want to do that so we can see the results? I think you're going to have to vote, probably. Perfect. All right. So for those of you who have gotten onto GroupMap, you can see these results yourselves, but for those of you who may not be on it, you can see what the results are. So you can see that we've got a lot of others out there, folks that don't necessarily identify with industry. It looks like the biggest section of this participants here are industry, both for the drug and device sectors, which is great. We've got a lot of patients, which is always a signature aspect of everything that PFMD and the EPF and UPATI do when they get together. We've got some researchers, some CROs, and patient organizations, separate from patients per se, and caregivers and regulators. All right, let's go to the next question. And that is your level of patient engagement that you are contributing or that your organization is involved. And I don't, my option, it looks like the survey for me, I can't move to the next question. There we go. Getting moved, I think. The next question. Okay, here we go. All right, so note up there, there's a definition area under that survey. If you're on group map, your default is that the survey button up there at the top, there's a little tiny eye. And if you click on that, you'll see that there'll be a drop down that you can click on, and it gives you some further definitions. Daniela has that up on the screen so that we can all see it. But different levels of getting involved with patients or working with patients, and this goes for the patients too. It's not just for industry. You know, how involved are you in medical product development? Are you involved in informing that decision, or do we have patients involved in that? Are we actually consulting? Is it more of a back and forth involvement? Is it involvement where you're actually helping get engaged somehow in the process of product development, or are you actually in the co-design level where you're sitting down at the table with device or drug makers? Yeah, I think we're having a little bit of a problem with there's not a submit. I also clicked on co-design and I don't see the results. I don't know, Danielle, is there a way to move it to the results page somehow? All right, well, we're having a little technical difficulty. It's going to close out in a couple seconds. Maybe close out the question, Danielle, and that will give us the results somehow. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. All right, great. So, wow, we've got a lot of people. That 33%, a third of this organization or the groups, the folks that are here, are involved in co-design. That's pretty spectacular. A lot of folks that involve or consult, but we do have a good group of folks that are involved here who are not currently engaged, or they're involved, you know, have a little bit of information into what it is that they're doing. So that's really helpful to understand. All right, if you can go to the next slide or switch back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk through a couple of slides as background to orient everybody. You know, the big question is, what is patient engagement? And I was actually in line at our cafeteria here at Edwards yesterday, and I was talking to our legal department, and I said, you know, I asked them if they even knew what it is that I do. And I'm very close to this woman, and she's like, actually, I really don't. It's like, okay, I probably need to do a little better job educating folks inside my company about what it is that we do at Edwards Patient Engagement. But there's actually a lot of definitions. We've got 4 of them up here, just as an example. I think there's some themes here, though, and I think it's really important to understand there's really not yet a widely accepted definition. It really refers to the active or meaningful involvement of patients in activities of medical product development and access. And I think there's some themes there, and that's what those orange rectangles are. It's got to be collaboration. It's got to be active and valued involvement of patients and caregivers in the process. It's got to be intentional and meaningful, and it all is designed to help facilitate and strengthen the process. And we use a word here at Edwards, authentic. I think, really doing patient engagement, talking to a patient and checking the box to say, hey, yeah, we talk to patients. That's it. That's not really true patient engagement. And I also want to make one quick interesting note for those of us in the medical device industry. I know this because, Virginie and I struggle with this every day. I think there's some confusion that patient engagement is patient advocacy. And in our company at Edwards, we actually do include them almost as a part of it. Patient advocacy is something that we work in. But today's discussion is really about how is it that we involve patients in the development and delivery of our products. It's not about how do we get patients involved in policy making. That's important, and there is an absolute role for patients in that, but and for companies to be involved in helping support that effort. But it's also a little bit of a sticky area, I think, and I think it's something that we really want to try to let companies and patient groups work on together. Okay, so and then the next slide. Developing the patient engagement ecosystem. For those of you who don't know this, patient engagement's actually been in development for over 27 years. And you can see there's been a lot of activity, but if you look at where that activity has popped up, it's really been a lot on the drug side. And the medical device sector has been a little bit slower to evolve. Pat, go to the next slide. For those of you who are not involved or understanding what medtech is, it's a lot of things. It's part of the reason why medical devices has not been involved in patient engagement. It's the devices that are implantable or not. It can be bedpans and hospital beds. It can be contact lenses. I'm wearing a medical device here, my glasses, but it can also be, a hip replacement, a knee replacement. It can be a pacemaker or a heart valve. It also includes in vitro diagnostics. That's when you get a test for whether or not you have COVID-19, that goes to a lab, and the technology that's designed to help measure that is part of medical devices. And then now more and more digital health solutions. Like some of the apps that we see on helping us manage our healthcare or actually give feedback to our health is important and is many times regulated as a medical device. So the next slide, where we at Edwards and PFMD and UPATI and EPF has started to come together is that we want to try to take all the work that's been done in patient engagement and bring it over to the medical device sector. And so last year, a group of us got together and started a process of how do we take some of the materials that PFMD has developed and really translate that into medical device speak. Our industries are very different in the way that we operate, but we have something in common, and that is we are doing what we do so that we can help people. And there is some very common language here, and we're really just trying to make sure that those of us in the device industry can understand how to engage in medical technology. And of course, we had to find some companies that would understand what is patient engagement and get involved, because that's part of the problem. We got a little bit of chicken and egg problem there. And luckily, Medtronic really stepped up to be one of the best leaders in this group. And I was really excited to and have had a great time getting to know Virginie and their company a little bit more about what it is that they're devoted to in patient engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Virginie and ask her to share a little bit more about what we've done in this group and what Medtronic is doing in patient engagement.
Thank you very much, Barry. Hello again, everybody. My name is Virginie Delage, and I work for Medtronic in Western Europe, and I'm responsible for our patient engagement activities in the CRM division and Cardiovascular Diagnostics Solution division as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So Medtronic was first involved with PFMD a little over a year ago in September of last year, when I was invited to participate to this patient engagement in Medtech working group. And this was a very great project initiated by Edwards, and it had two objectives. First, we wanted to review and adapt the patient engagement tools that were already existing and that were created for pharma specifically. And we wanted to adapt them to medtech. And we also wanted to explore and see how we could co-create a patient engagement strategy for Medtech. And you can see on this slide the great people and companies that were involved in this initiative, because as Barry said, we cannot do that on our own. We all have to join forces to advance patient engagement in Medtech. If we go to the next slide. So I just discussed these patient engagement tools that already existed and were developed for pharma. And I'm going to actually detail quickly these 4 tools for you. Please note that these tools were actually launched in April of this year, and they are available on the PFMD website, and you can find the link here on that slide. So the first of the tools is this patient engagement quality guidance document. And this document is actually a very practical guide, and it proposes 7 quality criteria to really help us plan, to develop as well, and to assess all the quality of our patient engagement initiatives all along the product development cycle. So a very useful working document, very practical. The second document is the Synapse database. And the Synapse database could be thought of as the LinkedIn for patient engagement. Actually, it's a digital network, and it is interconnecting all of the patient engagement actors, the initiatives, the different organizations and resources. So it goes far beyond just a landscape mapping. It actually also provides the full range of patient engagement management tools that we are discussing about today. The third tool is a very nice training platform. So this engagement e-learning program is actually very much of an awareness tool for culture change. And there are actually different levels of training. The first level is really a very short 15 minutes patient engagement basics training. So it provides an introduction to patient engagement, what is meaningful patient engagement, and who can contribute to patient engagement. There is a second level of training, a bit longer, a 45 minutes training on the patient engagement value. So it goes deeper into what is patient engagement, what's the value, and how we can do it and how to do it right. And the last level of training is a very nice 90 minutes training on patient engagement in practice. So this really provides the first steps to make patient engagement happen in your organization. The last tool is actually reference contracts. So these contracts were co-created, and these are really guiding principles for contracts for collaboration between patient and industry. The aim is really to improve the contracting process between us and patients, and to make it faster and easier for patients to understand the requirements of this contracting. As we said, it was originally created for the pharma industry, but we reviewed it and we confirmed that it was very useful as it is for Medtech as well. So you will see in there is a template agreement that really we can look at and we can adapt according to our specific needs. If we go to the next slide. So patient engagement at Medtronic, where do we are? So I think we all know and acknowledge that the medtech industry is maybe a little bit further behind the pharma industry in our efforts to engage with patients. For us at Medtronic, patient engagement is really doing everything we do with physicians. So usually in our life cycle product, we engage with physicians from R&D to clinical to actually post-market activities. And this is exactly what we want to do with patients, engaging with patients from R&D to clinical to post-market activities. So I think the fact that there are positions now within the industry like Barry or like myself in Western Europe is a clear sign that the medtech industry is heavily focused on patient engagement. speaking about the tools that I just mentioned to you all, for example, at Medtronic in Western Europe, we would like to make these basic patient engagement training, the nice 15-minute basic course, mandatory for all our employees in CRM and CDS in Western Europe. And actually, we're working very hard on building our full patient engagement strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, for example, at Medtronic. And we are looking at it, and we are looking at what are the key pillars really to improve our patient centricity. And we came up with 3 pillars that are very important for this aspect. And the first one is around culture and communication. So it's really how do we continue to embed a culture of patient centricity within our organization. And it starts with the vision, with having that vision embedded into the culture, and also about the way we communicate both internally and externally about our efforts in patient engagement. The second key pillar is really around insights. So it's really around understanding perfectly the patient journey and what are all the needs of the patient along the journey. What is the patient experience? What are the barriers and what are the leverage points, and what kind of solutions we can develop to meet all of these needs. And the third pillar is really around engagement. So using all these insights to actually inform all of our engagement activities. And this has to do with everything that is before pre-treatment decision, and then everything that has to do with the after. So the post-treatment experience, and also to inform all of our investment decisions. And we have several key enablers that are actually very important across all of these pillars, and things like coming up with very specific key performance indicators, and also partnership with patient association groups. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to show you a few small examples of different patient engagement initiatives at Medtronic. Very, very different types of initiative. But the first one, for example, you can see a picture here on the top right side of the slide. And this was actually during COVID. And it was very difficult for patients implanted with pacemakers or other heart devices to come to the hospitals to have their device checked. So we came up with this kind of drive-through pacemaker clinics to help actually healthcare providers check their patients while the patient could stay in their own car from the comfort and the safety of their own car. We are also driving awareness campaigns about our latest technologies, for example. So some of the latest technology involve a portfolio of app-connected heart devices, and patients implanted with these heart devices can now be remotely monitored via an app on their smartphone. So this gives patients an additional level of freedom, knowing that they will have their phone with them all the time, and the device can now communicate to the patient clinic via this app on their smartphone that they carry with them all the time. And when you get the slides, you can click on these links and learn more about these different innovations. Another innovation that we are communicating about is, for example, the smallest pacemaker in the world that you see on the right side of the screen here. This Micrab pacemaker is actually the smallest pacemaker in the world. It is also a leadless pacemaker. So this gives patients a new way of feeling about having an implanted pacemaker, because the device is completely implanted within the heart, and there's actually no physical reminder of having a heart device implanted. There's nothing that they can feel here under the skin, for example. So we're also communicating to people about technologies like leadless pacemakers. If we go to the next slide. We are also participating to some European level initiatives. So some of you may have seen the recent press release from the European Alliance for Cardiovascular Health. So it's a new multi-stakeholder alliance that is actually bringing together 15 leading European and international organizations. And this alliance is really pushing in Europe to tackle the burden of cardiovascular disease. We got involved with several awareness campaigns with either patient association or societies, scientific societies, like the Just Go campaign. It was a very nice campaign managed by the Global Heart Hub, which is an umbrella of patient organization. It was at the time of COVID, a very important information to be provided to patients that if suddenly you start experiencing symptoms that may be related to a cardiac issue, when your heart says so, just go to the hospital. Don't stay home with these symptoms. Just go to the hospital. It can be a heart attack. It can be a stroke. Don't stay home. And the European Society of Cardiology created a similar kind of campaign called You Can't Pause a Heart. And this was a campaign to also encourage people to seek help in case of heart symptoms. And the last project, and a nice introduction to our next speaker, is actually the UPATI Reload project. And Medtronic is involved as a Medtech partner to help contribute to the development of a new content in the area of medical device and digital health.
Hello, I'm ready to go. Can I have the slides, please? Yes, hello again. And I'm here today actually to talk about my experience as a patient in patient engagement in development of medical devices, as also to talk about training patients and what kind of opportunities there are for patients that want to know more about how medical devices are developed. In particular, I would like to talk about the UPATI, which is a real center of excellence for patient training. And also, I would like to support patients in this learning process. So I'm ready for the next slide, please. So where are we in patient engagement in MedTech? First of all, I mean, you're probably all aware that a new regulation came into force at the end of May. And with this new regulation, also the role of patients becomes more important. Article 65 of this regulation states a member state should ensure the involvement of patients and all patient organizations. Of course, this new regulation is enforced in Europe, and I'm really Europe-based, and I think I speak more about the European side of things. I know less about the American side. What I've learned so far is that you are way ahead of us in terms of patient engagement, so we can all learn. But this is the current situation here in Europe. So we have this fantastic new regulation, and in theory, patients should be involved more and more now. But what is the reality? That patient input still is not considered a priority, especially in diagnostics. Some people, for example, told me, well, what do we care what patients think when we talk about MRI machines and we are building them? Well, the point is that patients have to use MRI machines. I'm one of those, and I can tell you they're really uncomfortable. So I think that if the industry listened to patients to begin with, then we will probably have solutions that fit patients better. Second point, that patients take into consideration mainly for user testing. I think this is one of the things that normally medtech companies do. Oh, but we've included patients, you know, they've tested our device. Okay, but that's a little bit too late already, and it doesn't necessarily always happen. So I think we can still fill some gaps. Next slide, please. So what do we need? Well, we need some things from industry, and we need some things from patients, of course. For the industry, at least speaking again from a patient perspective, we need a change of mentality. I think it's great that we have some representatives here today that are talking about patient engagement and how it's established in their organizations, but that's not always the case. I've spoken to quite a few medtech companies that tell me that patient engagement is not highly regarded inside the company because they think they are purely commercial, so they don't understand where the patient fits. So I think we really need to sort of start a movement of changing mentality inside the industry and make them understand that whatever they do is for the patient, so patients got to do something in this picture. A second point, which I think is really important, is to make good use of material developed for drug development. We've spent many years developing patient engagement guides. I personally contributed to the PFMD guide on patient involvement in clinical outcome assessments. We've heard of these fantastic later developments in the medtech industry. So there are some interesting resources to help you. So I think we should really use it. You know, it's there, it's free for everybody, and we could make the most of it. Another thing we can do for industry is learn from pharmaceutical industry. They had to go through the same path. I remember when I started, it was over 5 years ago, patient engagement was almost unknown. No pharma company was structured to do patient engagement, and now they come a long way. So I think the medtech industry can learn quite a bit from the pharmaceutical industry. So why not take this opportunity? Last but not least is to involve patients at the design stage, not after prototyping, which is normally the case, in order that we can develop something that is really useful for them and not just testing once the product has already been produced. Next slide, please. And what do we need for patients? Because of course, if we're talking about patient engagement and how patients should be active in this process, then I think it's also fair to say that patients have to do something. One thing then we need to do is training, of course. The training is the best way for patients to get the information and the right tools they need to be able to contribute in a positive way. A second point that what patients can do is to collect data on quality of life to contribute to evidence-based decision-making, you know, normally. And I'm one of the persons that thinks that clinical outcomes should not be the only point that we consider, and quality of life is as important, and patients and patient associations can totally collect evidence that can contribute to this process. Another point that I would like to suggest is start from the end. This is the case I sort of like experienced. For example, health technology assessment is a good example to prove how important it is to have patient input in deciding if a medical device should be reimbursed. And so why not start from HTA and do like the salmon and going against the current? You know, sometimes it works because that's the point where the reimbursement is discussed. So I think that if patients can provide some insights and they can make all the people involved understand that a specific device can be more useful than another, or if it suits their needs better, then I think people would listen. So this is just a suggestion, but just to say that sometimes we don't necessarily have to start, but we can start from the finish. Next slide, please. And talking about training, of course, brings me to the topic of EUPATI. EUPATI is the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. I'm sure that many of you already know it, but for those who don't, EUPATI was launched in 2012 by the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is a partnership between the European Commission and the EFPIA, which is the representation of the pharma industries in Europe, and was then led by the European Patients Forum, and today is an independent non-profit foundation. It is a public-private partnership with 33 partners from patient organizations, pharmaceutical industry, and academia. The main activities of EUPATI, of course, are training patients, but not only, also companies. And we, of course, EUPATI offers the patient expert training program, which I also did, and which has now trained over 200 patients on medicines research and development. And now we have a new format, which is called EUPATI in Open Classroom. So everybody can access the different modules when they want, without having to wait for an official opening of a course. The online toolbox on medicine development, where you can find information about how medicines are developed. We have 23 national platforms in Europe, plus also in Japan. And patient engagement trainings with over 250 professionals trained in industry and academia. Next slide, please. So what are we doing for medical devices? Okay, part of the U-Party work plan for 2021 the objective was to expand the toolbox and the U-Party patient expert training program content, and we decided to include medical devices because as we listened to today, this is an area where patient engagement is still lacking, but is so important. So the work on the new modules is supported by the U-Party alumni. So like people like me, graduates of the U-Party training program course, and the EIT Health supported the U-Party Reload project. Well, the expected outcome is a new training module for the U-Party Open Classroom by the end of 2021 in English, with the contribution of many wonderful partners. I think this has been a really multi-stakeholder effort, and it's really important, and it's a marvelous experience. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the award-winning slide that U-Party created for the patient involvement in pharma development. And I'm saying award-winning because, you believe it or not, every time I go and speak to some event, I always find people presenting this slide, even from industry. So I think this has been extremely successful, and it's also extremely helpful for people to understand where patients can make a difference. We are currently developing a roadmap similar to this one for the medtech industry. So it's important to show where patients can be included in the process. And visuals are a great way of explaining that in very practical terms. Next slide, please. To conclude, let me say that Medtech is the next challenge for patient engagement, but we have good experience behind us that can help, so we can certainly make full advantage of that. Training for patients is definitely a key enabling factor to improve patient participation in Medtech development. And the multi-stakeholder, as we see in co-creation, is a great opportunity to improve the current state, or we all learn and grow together as a community. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks so much, Paola. Now introducing Michelle.
Hello. So I want to share with you a little bit about the patient engagement activities that we're doing at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And I want to really congratulate my fellow panelists, all the work they've been doing to help expand the patient's voice. Can I have the next slide, please? As you probably have heard me and my colleagues say many times before, patients really are central to the work we do. We are inspired by the tagline of being inspired by patients and driven by science. And we really seek to make sure that we provide safe and effective devices that meet the needs of patients and address public health. And to do that, we know that it's important we hear from patients. Next slide. Patients can give us insights to what products need to be developed, how studies should be designed, and as well as post-market efforts. They can bring to light new considerations that were not previously considered in our current perspectives on pressing issues. They can also raise or confirm problems that can exist with certain medical products and communicate their preferences, as well as shape the tools that are necessary to better evaluate the performance of investigational products. They also can help us understand what populations or subgroups that may have different perspectives than the larger patient population so that we don't leave any group behind. Next slide. You heard Paolo talk about the ways in which patient engagement can be useful across the entire development pipeline. And we use this visual about the total product life cycle, that patient input is critical from the discovery and ideation phase for a medical device all the way through to post-market monitoring. Patients can give us insights into what devices need to be developed to meet their needs, help us develop devices that are human-focused and human-centered, and are usable, as well as inform clinical trials that are patient-friendly and patient-centric. They can inform the benefit-risk trade-offs they're willing to accept as we as regulators are making decisions about the benefit-risk trade-offs, and also how that information is communicated out to the public, either in the labeling or in other accompanying materials. Patients can also give us insights into how the device is performing once it's in general use. They are part of the active agents of the boots on the ground surveillance system, and they can be very useful in helping us ensure that the rest of the public remains safe and the devices perform as expected. Next slide. Patient engagement, as you've already heard, is a longstanding history at the Food and Drug Administration, starting way back in 1988 with very activated and driven patients dealing with HIV and AIDS. All the way to now in 2021, we are seeing more and more mechanisms that exist at the agency for engaging with patients. And I like to shed a little bit of light on some of those mechanisms. Next slide. This change management that you heard Barry allude to, where culturally there's been an evolution, has really taken root in our center. The patient and caregiver connection is one mechanism that our staff can use to get timely insights from patients about what it's like to live with their specific disease, interface with medical devices that are used in the diagnosis, treatment, and management of that disease, as well as other issues that may be facing that particular patient community. Those responses from the patient groups are aggregated and really can be useful at the time that the reviewer who's looking at a particular medical device submission or dealing with a particular topic needs it. Next slide. We currently have 19 partners as part of our connection, and we are always open to working with other patient organizations. Next slide. We are also working to foster this culture of patient engagement within our walls. We are working arduously to make sure that all of us consider patients and their perspectives in our daily business. We've done a number of engagement activities, as you can see on this slide, and we've connected with a number of patients who are in those underserved population, the pediatric population, and brought them in so that they can share their perspective, their experiences with medical devices too. We've also had some engagement activities where we've connected with patients who are living with the long-term symptoms associated with COVID-19 and hearing about how medical devices are helping them on their journey or not available to help them on their journey. And this reciprocity of hearing from patients, we also extend and lend our voices to patient meetings. We've given talks at various patient organizations meetings across the country. Next slide. We also want to make sure that others know that we are open to hearing from patients, working with patients in a very collaborative and meaningful way. We have videos on our website that talk about our commitment to putting patients first. And in those videos, we reflect the various voices of patients with whom we've previously and continue to work with. Next slide. But it's not just limited to our center. The entire agency has a commitment to including the patient's voice. The FDA Representative Program is one mechanism where we can get consultation from patients from over 300 who are living with over 300 medical conditions and give insights to either particular medical products that the review teams are considering or other issues that may be facing the agency. Next slide. The most formal mechanism we have to get patients' insights are really through the Patient Engagement Advisory Committee. This particular committee is housed at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health and is the only one like it at the agency. It is comprised of patients, caregivers, and patient advocates, and they provide formal recommendations to FDA regarding general matters related to medical devices. Next slide. We actually had a meeting for this advisory committee yesterday, and I'm going to talk on the fact that not only do we hear from patients through these advisory committee meetings, but we do something with the recommendations that they provide. Next slide. The first meeting we had focused on clinical trials, and this was back in 2017. We discussed ways in which patients can engage in the clinical trial enterprise, not only the conduct and design of the studies, but also how results are communicated. And what we heard from our panel members is that FDA needs to make it very clear that that industry can interact with patients in that particular part of their product development process. And so we not only heard that, but we also heard the message from them that we need to do things to encourage underserved populations and underrepresented populations, such as people from various racial and ethnic and demographic groups to participate in clinical trials. So we put forward a video on participation in clinical trials to encourage folks from diverse patient populations to participate. Next slide. And we also issued a draft guidance document on patient engagement in clinical trials. That is still a draft, but it lays out some basic principles about the importance and the value of hearing from patients when designing the trials. Next slide. In 2018, we talked about patient-generated health data at the Patient Engagement Advisory Committee meeting. And during this discussion, we looked at things like patient-driven registries and social media outlets and sensor-based technologies as ways that patients can actively contribute information and that can lead to evidence to inform regulatory processes. We heard from the panel that it's important that we lay out some expectations for that information so that it can be most useful. And we had a public meeting as a result of that recommendation to further discuss ways in which patient-driven, patient-generated data can have an impact on the regulatory processes. Next slide. In 2019, we discussed cybersecurity vulnerabilities, which are increasingly facing medical devices as they become more and more connected to not only the wirelessly, but also to hospital systems. And one thing we discussed is how do we communicate about those vulnerabilities to the patient population? We heard from our panel members that it's important that they know what's actionable, that the messages are clear, and that FDA is quickly responsive and notifies the public about these challenges. And so we heard that and came forward with a best practices document about how one might communicate about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And we're not stopping there. We are working on a video series on how patients can be empowered to protect their connected medical devices. And these videos were all informed by engaging with patients in the construction of the video's content. Next slide. So I encourage you to look forward those videos later this month. In 2020, we talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we know this is a critical element to digital health technologies. As a part of those conversations with our Patient Engagement Advisory Committee, we heard that trust and transparency are critical and that all people are represented in the data sets on which these algorithms learn. Based on that feedback, we put forward an action plan that put forward those two issues, trust and transparency, as well as ways to mitigate algorithmic bias. We are also having a meeting to further discuss these elements on October 14th, and I encourage you all to tune in. Next slide. So I've talked about the ways that we not only heard from the patients, but also have taken actionable steps with the recommendations that patients provide to us. I want to touch very briefly on some other initiatives we have to hear and engage from patients, as well as work and partner with them. The Patient Engagement Collaborative is a way that FDA works within an external group of patient organizations and individual representatives so that we can discuss topics and work on enhancing patient engagement in medical product development, so across the entire agency. Next slide. We also have patient listening sessions with the National Organization for Rare Disorders. These conversations are incredibly useful, where we hear from patients who are living with rare conditions about what can be done, where their unmet needs are, and what it currently exists and what could be improved upon. And it's incredibly valuable for our staff to hear from these patient groups as they are looking at submissions in various product areas. Next slide. We also have a guidance that we put out about how one might collect comprehensive and representative input. And this is led by my colleagues at the Center for Drug Evaluation, as well as in biologics. This document emphasizes the importance of comprehensive and representative input and how that can be quite useful in medical product development. Next slide. Collaboration is important. You saw that on Barry's first slide, and I want to talk about a couple of other efforts where collaboration, not just in the medical device industry and regulators, but definitely including patients in all those efforts too. So the next slide. The FDA and the EMA have a patient engagement cluster where they collaboratively are working on ways and approaches for engaging and involving patient stakeholders. They also collaborate on high-profile topics of mutual interest. So really looking to build bridges across waters. Next slide. We also work with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. This particular organization has been committed to expanding the patient's voice, not only in generating science, but also in engaging patients all along the process where patients are part of creating that science. And we at FDA, at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, are part of this public-private partnership. Next slide. And then lastly, I want to emphasize our strategic priority of collaborative communities, where we believe that this grassroots movement, where where patients and industry and healthcare providers work collectively to solve shared challenges and achieve common objectives and outcomes is critical to really making great strides in advancing healthcare outcomes for all people. Next slide. We currently participate in 12 collaborative communities, and you can see on the slide, there are a number of different areas that are of healthcare importance. We always encourage others to consider this approach and to remember that it's important to include patients in those conversations too. As change happens, it doesn't just happen within the walls of FDA or within individual companies, but it needs to ripple across the entire ecosystem. And efforts like this are really making that effect realized. Next slide. So patient engagement is one element. It informs the science, it informs the decision-making, and really does lead to significant healthcare impacts downstream. Next slide, we have a number of different resources at FDA. And for those of you who are interested in the work done at my sister centers, I've put contact information for their particular patient engagement liaisons. We encourage you to reach out to us. We are responsive and we do want to include patients in the work that we do. Next slide. And here's a slide with just listing some more resources. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to Barry.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. That was fantastic. And thanks for everybody for a great panel here. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to jump right into the Q&A. If you notice on the Q&A app down there, a little button there, you can see there have been some questions already posted and a couple already answered. So I'd suggest you go ahead and check the answered bucket there. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and highlight a couple. Michelle, can you elaborate on what FDA may be doing to train patient advocates to empower them to be able to be engaged, or is that something that FDA is doing?
So right now, we don't have a lot of resources to commit to doing the training, but we are interested in working with people who are interested in doing training. We have proposed this as someplace that we'd like to expand and start doing in the future. As you know, our patient science and engagement program at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health is quite new. It just actually started during the last medical device user fee amendment cycle, so less than 5 years old. But we've taken a lot of great strides to inculcate patient engagement as part of our culture. We do work with patient groups, and we are always willing to give insights and input to materials that they may be wanting to create around educating patients in the medical device evaluation process.
Great, thanks so much. And let's see, regarding the level of patient engagement survey, I won't read the whole thing. How do we help organizations see the full picture of patient engagement so that we can truly move towards a co-design partnership? And I know, Virginie, you've got some perspectives on that. I know you're working really hard at Medtronic to try to ensure your colleagues are all educated on the full picture. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's that's a very good point. I think the patient engagement topic has to come from the top. And I think you, Barry, you were mentioning the importance of your CEO actually talking to that, and for this patient centricity mindset to cascade down the organization. So this is exactly what's happening with Medtronic. Our CEO, our new CEO, Jeff Marta, is actually very, very into patient engagement and hearing the voice from the patient. So when it comes from the CEO, it's much easier to have the thing rolling down in the organization. And for us, clearly, the way to engage with patients, as I said earlier, should be the same as the way we engage with our physicians, to really involve them from R&D to clinical to post-marketing activities. And there are already lots of things that our R&D team are doing, engaging with patients. An example is these app-connected heart devices that I mentioned earlier. This is a great innovation for patients, and obviously designing the app was done with patients. There were a lot of hours spent with patient testing the app, the user interface, user experience, etc. So that's just an example of R&D that shows this willingness to involve patients. For us, for example, when we are doing patient campaigns, it's very important to be sure that we gather insights from patients. So doing research, market research with patients to better understand their needs, what they think of certain materials, or even co-create with patient groups. We're working with patient groups also to co-create materials is very important, and then probably to test also the materials that were developed further with patients. So not doing this on our own, but really asking for feedback and input on everything we do.
Great, thanks. CROs, which are really third-party organizations that are heavily involved in helping us in medical technologies develop our technologies, really could be an important role, play an important role in this. Let's see. I'm gonna ask maybe Michelle. Any suggestions or thoughts on how we can maybe get CROs more involved? And I can't remember what CRO stands for.
Contract research organizations.
Thank you. Yes.
Wow. I think there's room for everyone to be involved. I think the question earlier about training, I think there's an opportunity for CROs to create materials that can help patients be more engaged in the research enterprise. We've worked quite a bit with, in fact, almost all the research studies that we've been involved with at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health have had patients as part of the study group. And we've done some just-in-time training with those patients who are part of it. So when we are working on developing, let's say, a patient-reported outcome measure, we'll do a briefing packet for the patients who are going to be participating. We'll do video training, we'll answer questions, and we'll touch back and see what part we need to revisit, or making sure that they are empowered to contribute. So yes, I think the entire healthcare ecosystem can play a role in how to prepare patients to engage, depending on which part of the process they're going to be engaging in.
Great, thanks.
Barry, can I add something?
Please, Paola. Sorry.
Yes, I'm going back to the question before. It was very interesting what Virginie was saying about their CEO have been heavily into patient engagement. But you see, as patients, this is one of the problems I have. Different companies have different standards, different levels of patient involvement. It's very difficult from the patient side to understand who is doing what and at what level they are. So I wonder if you as the industry can give us some tips. What can we do as patients? Because we cannot map every single company and understand what they're doing, what level they're in, and where are they, how we can get involved.
That's a great question. I personally am involved in working directly with patient groups, and they are struggling with trying to figure out who at Edwards they should be talking to at what time. And we're trying to make it easy for them. Hey, come to me, I can help coordinate it. But even as an insider inside our company, we're pretty diverse and we've got a lot of different functions, and it's hard to figure out the right spot. Honestly, I think the solution is that companies need to devote resources to this function so that we can help choreograph that interaction and help bring patients and patient groups into the discussion. It's a great question. I was actually going to ask you, Paola, sorry to put it back on you, but in terms of helping companies understand the value of working with patient groups, I suspect because Patty is in the role of helping train patients on being involved in the process, you must have some really good materials and resources available to help companies like ours really understand. Here's some examples of how patients have been involved and why it's important to support their getting educated.
Absolutely. I mean, UPATI, as I said, does not only train patients, but trains also companies as well. So there are different courses that can be tailored to each company's needs. And the aim of the course is absolutely that, to try to let them understand from the patient perspective why patient engagement is important and how patients should be engaged in a meaningful way. So it's definitely training for all, not just patients, but also companies.
Great. Okay. Well, we have time for one more question, and I think the one for Michelle is a good one here. The UK MHRA just published their patient engagement strategy. Do you have any advice, Michelle, for our friends over there across the pond, what they can do to help expand and educate others about how to get involved in patient engagement?
Advice. Well, I mean, I think they should be applauded for taking that stride to put forward a patient engagement strategy. I do think it's important one, to do that, but also to be patient. It's a process. It really does. One of the things that we've learned is that it takes time for people to shift their focus and expand their approach to consider different voices in the process. I will say one lesson that we learned. It was actually in the diagnostic realm, and I think, Paolo, to your example, there was a workshop and that our diagnostics team was holding, and we just suggested maybe you should include patients as speakers in that particular panel, in that workshop, and sit on the panel. And the patients brought some insights that a lot of the developers hadn't thought of, and they acknowledged that during the meeting. And following that meeting, then that same office who before had told me patient engagement, we're dealing with laboratory tests, we really don't need to talk about patient engagement, came back over and over again about, we think this is something that patients should weigh in on. Can you find some patients that we can talk to so we can better understand the impact? So I think that patience with the process, but constantly looking for opportunities that patients can potentially provide insights, and having patients who are willing to provide those insights, I think has really been what's been changing the culture within our walls, and also part of what's changing the culture outside of CDRH. So I do think that persistence, exploring creative approaches to including the patient's voice, and looking for opportunities to help empower patients to contribute, I think is critical.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, we're again running behind time a little bit, so check out the answered questions in the Q&A app there for some more details, and we will have an opportunity to have follow-up after this, so there'll be some emails sent out, so if you have additional questions, we can make sure that you connect. So we're going to go to the next section of this. This is our opportunity for you to wake up and get involved and be involved in co-creating and giving us feedback on what we can do, all of us as a community, to do better to get involved. So we're going to post into the chat here again, for those of you who may have shown up a little bit late, a link to the group map application. And we're going to also show it on the screen here for those of you who may not be able to engage in it directly. If you open up group map right now, you should see, let's see, what's my group map? I am still on the results of a poll, but we're getting moved. Okay, here it comes. All right, so there are 6 blocks here. Answer some questions here on how we can help improve some of the aspects of patient engagement. And again, look at that list up at the top. In fact, I'm going to have Daniela turn that brainstorm box off in a minute. But if you go up to your own browser and you click on that little eye next to the brainstorm box, and then click the box that pops down, you'll see these definitions. Okay, so the question here is, from the tools that have been presented so far, recognize we didn't really get into a lot of detail here, so maybe some of you may have to familiarize yourselves a little bit more with it, maybe even ask some questions here in the Q&A. But what's the benefit of having these tools for Medtech or not? You know, please share your experience with using these tools if you've used them, or describe how you could see yourself using them. And I kind of think this might also be a way to, you know, in some ways vote on, you know, hey, wow, this sounds pretty cool. For example, Patty, patient training, you know, it sounds like that might be really helpful to have a third party help come in and train patient groups, so that then we can collaborate with them directly. So go ahead and click on the plus box, and Daniela, so that we can see it a little bit easier. Yeah, there you go. And then you can also vote up, I think. Yes, you can. Is that right? Maybe not. You can add a comment to some of the comments that have been posted before. So under PFND Synapse, I think Virginie, sorry, I'm still trying to get your name pronunciation, Virginie, she referred to that as like the LinkedIn of patient engagement. And I think that was a great analogy. So for those of you who haven't tried it out, I really encourage you to explore and learn more about what's going on in the world of patient engagement. It's a great portal to do that. And so some folks have posted, you know, that's a great tool to find groups to engage with. On the quality guidance, wow, that is a great idea. Identify new KPIs for those of you who are not in corporate America, key performance indicators. I think that's what the I is, to measure and track for patient engagement. It's a great source for that. Good comments there. So Michelle, while folks are commenting here, and some really good comments, on the other panel, there's a thought here, and I want to bring something up with you. Most patients will actually need both devices, diagnostics or follow-up, and medicines. So the walls between these two should come down with a common culture, standards, and practices for working with patients. And I'm kind of familiar with the structure of FDA. I recognize that it's a Food and Drug Administration, also deals with tobacco regulation, I believe, and maybe even veterinarian stuff. I'm not entirely sure. So within our products, I know you've got a sister agency over there, what we call CEDAR, Center for Drug, whatever. Any thoughts on like how FDA is trying to help break down these barriers and collaborate more between the different sectors?
No, I think the point that you brought up, the importance of working and stretching our arms across the agency to work together, is critical, and we do that. I and my colleagues at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research and Center for Biologic Evaluation and Research, along with the Office of the Commissioner's Office of Patient Affairs, we work together. We meet regularly to talk about patient engagement approaches. We all participate in each other's engagement events and invite each other to hear, listen, and share. Because we do know that there are a lot of products that have multiple elements. Patients don't just interface with one particular product; they interface with a spectrum of products. And when they're talking about their condition, they're talking about their condition and everything that touches it. And so all of us need to hear that, those perspectives. I will say that some of the patient-focused drug development meetings, which we've affectionately renamed patient-focused medical product development meetings, because more and more we're hearing patients talk about the use of digital health technologies in their care management, the drug solutions, the device solutions that they're employing, as well as some of the biologic opportunities they see. So it is blending, and the conversations that we're all having are shared. We share our draft guidance documents and work collaboratively on those too. And we want to make sure that we are working in a similar direction in terms of encouraging the voices of patients to be part of our regulatory processes.
Right. And I know my job is to keep us on time. And so I'm going to ask that we go to the next question, because we got a lot of really good fodder here, so that we can get some feedback on the next one. But as we transition, this is truly an homage to FDA's leadership. I mean, the level of involvement that FDA has had in trying to help drive everyone, including, is part of the reason why Edwards Lifesciences is involved in this. Yes, patients are our life's work, and life is now is our motto here. But having a regulatory agency to make this such a priority has really helped convince a lot of folks inside our organization, and I think in our industry, to get more involved in it. Okay, next question. Describe the challenges that you face when participating in implementing or executing meaningful, sustainable patient engagement in medtech. So for those of you who have not done it before, you can maybe hypothesize what could be some challenges to doing it. And for those of you who are in the patient community, I'm sure you might have some thoughts on some of the challenges that you've faced in working with the med tech sector. And we actually had a question about it. We talked about it a little bit earlier. So go ahead and click on that plus symbol, and let's start brainstorming. I was going to ask Paola a question about training from the previous one, but I forgot what it was, to be honest with you. All right. So contracting, legal barriers. Go ahead, Paula. Sorry.
I think I know which one it was. So I was going to answer actually, because I saw a comment saying that it might be difficult for patients to participate in training.
Exactly.
That's the one, isn't it? I
was
thought it was a great question, and especially depending on the region. But I would like to point out that now you party with the open classroom, new sort of new dimension. I mean, anybody from anywhere in the world can log in and train at their own pace, because you can access the modules when you want. So there is not a set timing that you need to fulfill. So it's very, very personalized, like medicine and medtech should be. So I encourage anybody to go on the UParty webpage and look about the open classroom, which I think it would be really useful.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful. And I think, and I don't know, was this developed before the pandemic, or is this was this developed as a part of kind of reaction to the pandemic?
No, it was a natural progression, to be honest. But you know, I think we were very good timing with very good timing.
Exactly. And I think Jana posted a link in there, link to the UPatty open classroom. All right, wow, we've got a lot of comments here. Challenges that we face. Expectation management for stakeholders. I know that's a big one for me. I know Virginie and I have talked a lot about that. Internal stakeholders, as they're learning about this, we have to set our expectations appropriately for them. They, you know, if they're disappointed, it can really be challenging. Oh, how to remunerate patients fairly. So we didn't mention this, I think, in the tools, but there is a fair market value calculator that was developed in partnership with PFMD and multiple organizations, I think led by the National Health Council. And so I don't know if you can post a link to the fair market value calculator in this, or if we want to send that link out later as our follow-up, but great tool. I've been using it with our legal and compliance department fairly extensively, and they really appreciate it. It's a great way to figure out, are we paying patients properly and the right amount? All right. So some medical tech companies don't have dedicated patient engagement personnel. That's a challenge, right, Virginie? I think you just changed jobs, right? So you're now dedicated to patient engagement, or are you still wearing another hat while you have patient engagement, which is pretty typical in the device industry?
Actually, I've been involved with patient engagement initiative for a very long time, but it was more on, they called it patient marketing and market research, because I'm still part of the commercial organization. So the patient marketing is related to obviously therapy awareness, disease awareness, marketing materials such as brochures and patient websites. And it's still a big part of my activity. But we are, of course, evolving the patient engagement strategy and therefore function into much more than just patient marketing. When you think about patient engagement, it is actually a very big bucket that has a lot of tactics into it. Patient marketing and even direct to patient marketing in certain countries in Europe is only one of the tactics. The rest is obviously dealing, as we said, with clinical trials or with lots of other activities such as patient association support and things like that. So we are getting there. We started from the patient marketing aspect. We're now evolving the function, and it is actually challenging. But there are lots of people who are one way or the other doing patient engagement, kind of patient engagement initiatives within companies without having the title. So I think lots of people out there are already trying to do that. You mentioned that, Barry. Even us with our official functions are still struggling to, have more and more people involved and to really trigger this. We are starting this process. So I think it's a good sign for the future. But you don't need to have the title to do patient engagement stuff. A lot of people are doing that already.
Great, thanks for the answer. Okay, let's go to the next question. We are still in our brainstorming, and while we jump to that link, I'm going to do a quick plug for the Medical Device Innovation Consortium that Dr. Tarver mentioned during her presentation. We well, let me plug that in a second. So the next question is, what do you still need to move? What do you still need to move sustainable and meaningful patient engagement forward within the medtech sector? So if you are a medtech device person, what do you need? Is there something that you think, like, what's your number one? What I really need is, and Virginia's already employed, so you can't have her. And I'm pretty happy here at Edwards. So what else could you use in terms of a resource to help you move things along? And while you are thinking about some answers and starting to actually, so Daniela, I think you need to close out the last question, because on mine it doesn't look like it's open. It looks like it's. There you go. All right. So you've been thinking your responses, so get ready to type. It'll start up here in a second. So I'm going to answer that. Okay, wow, that was fast. Case studies. Okay, so I'm going to give one. It's a great segue. Gijo James, who's in the audience here, who's with Johnson & Johnson, another great partner in the field of patient engagement, or actually a huge leader in the field, because partially they do have a drug division at Janssen. But he's asked a couple of questions about, like, how do we get the benefit risk regulatory framework tools available to device companies to better include patients. And Medical Device Innovation Consortium, of which Michelle and Gijo and I are fairly actively involved in, has a number of tools that are available on their website under their Science of Patient Input section. So we will provide a follow-up link to those resources. But if you want to incorporate patient perspectives into the development of devices at early stages and going into the regulatory process, we have some tools for you. And they're really scientifically based and fantastic resources. Also note that the Synapse has a number of resources. You can find all of that material that you're looking for from MDIC on Synapse. I probably should have plugged Synapse as the main go-to, and you can find that material on Synapse. Okay, so we've got a few answers here to what do you really need to make this happen. Regulators need to make patient engagement data mandatory. Ooh, that's controversial. I'm sure industry, I bet you an industry person did not post that.
I agree, definitely a patient.
Yeah, that was a patient right there. All right, good for you. And I'm not saying it's because we in industry oppose it per se, but I know some of my colleagues, it's been a little bit challenging to get people to agree to that. Industry doesn't like mandates, but it's a good idea. Improved access and integration of patient data. Okay, that's great. There's a couple comments to these too. You can see people can respond to and add a comment. Oh, love this. All right, great. Let's see. A commitment and drive for MedTech to include patients early and often. I wonder if there's a way to, I'm going to flip it and say maybe not commitment, but almost like out companies, or give them kudos, but then also share where the companies are not necessarily doing it as well. Maybe a little healthy competition between the companies might help get us to really adopt this stuff. Maybe we need to develop some sort of standard metric to measure the patient focusedness or patient centricity, but I like patient focus. PCORI, equivalent to PCORI, providing medtech research grants only to academics who actually involve patients in their work. So for those of you who are not familiar with PCORI, I don't know, actually, maybe Paula, are you familiar with opportunities for academics to do research that really encourages the use of patients or involvement and collaboration with patients in their research?
No, to be honest, I personally don't.
Okay.
I wouldn't go so far as to say there aren't any, because I think there are, but not that I know of, to be honest.
Well, here's one for you, Michelle. How about faster regulatory review timelines if patients have been actively involved in the MedTech dossier? What do you think?
So I think that patient input can help streamline the process. Yes, I do think that they can provide insights that keep us going down the wrong paths, potentially could make the clinical trials run more efficiently, as well as collect outcomes that are meaningful to them so that they're more likely to be retained through the duration of the study. And that can be impactful downstream. Getting all of that work done in advance helps to make the process more efficient. So I think patient engagement plays a huge role potentially in that.
Great. Okay, we're going to move to the last question. So Danielle, close out that question and move to question number 4. In your role, what can you do to further progress and support patient engagement in the medtech sector? I think Mahatma Gandhi was attributed with a quote, "If you want to change the world, start within yourself," something like that. So, okay, guys, you want a commitment? Let's commit. What can you do to further progress and support patient engagement in the medtech sector? Let's call this this is on the record, but we're not going to attribute it to anybody. What can you do to really change and bring this back into your companies, or bring it to patients or to companies if you're a patient or patient group? Include patient voice and benefit risk assessments. Great. As Michelle mentioned, there is already a lot of ways that CDRH is open to and welcoming and encouraging companies, sometimes subtly jabbing them to include patient preference data into their regulatory submissions. Hey, it might help you if you actually brought the patient perspective into the picture. Social media campaign to push medtech companies to join in. That's a great idea. I see one says continue to try to get engagement from medtech. It's been difficult. I feel like we need like a peer support group where we can all get together and like cheer each other up and come on, you can do it. Some of this has been challenging, and I don't think we can ever expect change to happen just because we have a great idea. We're going to get resistance, but that's okay. That's normal. So that's a great one. Keep up the work. Have you asked a patient? That's a great one. You know what? We should print that. I should print that out and have that on my desk. Not that I really work at a desk anymore these days, but we should have that just as a reminder every day in everything that we do. All right. Well, these are some fantastic suggestions. I think we're going to wrap this up. I summarize what we found here, what we've identified as some things we've learned and low-hanging fruit for opportunities for improvement. Is that right? Is there a slide that's coming up? There we go. All right. Awesome. So here we got some big comments here. Patient voice is important. The learning should be shared across all sectors. It's not just a drug thing. Increased awareness and education is still needed. We heard a little bit about the importance of remuneration, making sure that patient experience data and other resources from other organizations can be shared. And so that's part of what we're trying to do here. And wow, have you asked a patient? That made it, whoever that was. Great job. You win. You got the gold nugget for being the well, maybe not the best answer, but a great one. And what do we win? What do you give as a remuneration for that? Okay. Group map will remain open until Friday, October 15th, or if you're in Europe, until Friday, 15 October. And results will be shared with all the participants in a summary report. We really appreciate your involvement. We are finishing up with a couple minutes. I do want to point out that the Q&A, there were some questions that were not answered or we didn't get a chance to get to. So we're going to try to follow up with that in our follow-up responses. And we also do have some that were answered, but we'll make that information available to everyone. I don't know if we actually agreed to doing that PFMD, but we'll try to do that, right? So I want to say thanks so much to Michelle, Paola, Virginie, and of course the teams at PFMD, UPATI, and the European Patients Forum for hosting this amazing event. Great job, everyone. Thanks so much. And let's let's keep going. Let's keep on trying to help patients, and let's ask, have I asked a patient? Have a great day.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Barry.
everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.